So if you haven't guessed, our next discussion focuses on diverse and multi-generational workforces. And for this, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Mohamed Yacine and Chinedu Nwanguma. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I do apologize, Chinedu, who will lead us into this segment, followed by a panel discussion. So I just want to mention there will be a few more polls as we go through this segment. We will follow that on with, like I mentioned, a panel discussion. But without further ado, Dr. Mohamed Yacine, we're pleased to welcome you back, our longtime friend with Business School Netherlands. Mohamed's leadership has been instrumental in bringing action learning to new contexts around the world. And in his session today, he'll challenge us to rethink how organizational culture drives performance in real-time situations. Chinedu, please join me in welcoming Chinedu as a leader dedicated to shaping inclusive and dynamic workforces across Africa and beyond, and with substantial experience helping organizations navigate cultural and generational diversity. Chinedu will bring fresh perspectives on building teams that thrive in today's fast-changing world. So up first, Chinedu, over to you, followed by a poll. We look forward to hearing from you, Chinedu. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me, please?
We can hear you. Thank you, Chinedu.
All right, fantastic. Thanks for the introduction, and it's a pleasure being here. Just allow me to put up my slides. Confirm you can see my slides, please.
We can, thank you.
Fantastic. Let's just go. Fantastic. All right, so welcome everybody. I'm just going to share, my perspectives around diverse and multi-generational workforces. And I would encourage us, if we have questions, just put them on the chat box. We will pick those questions. There'll be a panel discussion following this, and then we'll make sure to answer as many questions as are possible. And so in terms of outline, we'll be touching on quite a number of, dimensions as we go through my session. First off, we'll look at just gaining further understanding around diversity in today's workplace. We'll talk about generational diversity and how we bridge gaps. We'll delve into cultural and global awareness, as well as gender identity, inclusive leadership, and ultimately share some nuggets around building inclusive and high-performing teams. Hopefully, we have enough time to touch on all of this. But before I proceed, I usually would like to set the context, just give us like a background so we understand really, where we're speaking from and what is really informing our discourse this afternoon. Of course, we would agree that in today's world of work, teams are increasingly more diverse, and these diversity elements cut across cultures, they cut across gender, they cut across generations, the way we think, and the way we go about our approach to problem solving and all of that. And so the challenge with that is, it becomes really critical that we are creating workspaces that are safe, where everyone feels valued, empowered to, contribute in a meaningful way and in a way that essentially they feel respected and valued without prejudice to, their background, to age, to identity, and all the other diversity elements that I touched on earlier. And whose accountability really is it to do that? And that's where leadership comes in. As leaders here, it is important that we are able to recognize differences. When we truly do that, then we can sort of bridge communication gaps and ultimately build and maintain mutual respect. And so the essence of our session today really is to explore and interrogate, how we can lead with awareness and inclusion, especially given, the context I have just described, which is the realities of today's workplace. So this again just sets the stage for what we'll be engaging in going forward. And so if we go straight into it, diversity in today's workplace, let's even get to understand, a bit more, a bit deeper. There are several elements, like I alluded to earlier. If you take demography, for example, so we are looking at things like age, gender, ethnicity, disability, and in respective jurisdictions, globally, you'll see all sorts of affirmative action, in place to ensure that we are building a much more diverse and inclusive world in terms of some of these demographic elements. And then if you go to a second major element that, I have identified. So we're talking cultural now. So we are looking at things touching on values. These are a bit more, softer things that you really may not put a hand to, but they are there and they carry very significant influence, particularly, within the world of work, the context of work. So you're looking at values, you're looking at customs, traditions, sometimes our worldviews, religion, even our communication norms, for example. You go to certain jurisdictions, perhaps with communications is a bit more direct. It's far more flexible in certain other jurisdictions. It's perhaps a bit more diplomatic, a bit more indirect. And so these are all elements, that influence, cultural perspectives from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. And we really need to be aware of, of these elements. And then you can touch on geographical, for example, so locations, climate, time zones, and all of that. Taking together all of these, would influence productivity and outcome in the workplace within the context, again, of the organization. And so it is critical that, we are aware of this. If you look at the nature of work today, very many of us are working in, if you like, matrix teams that cut across countries and regions and geographies. For example, I recall, in my former life, where I was part of a global team, and I had my director sitting in Dubai, and I was, sitting here in Nigeria. And typically in the Middle East, if you know the Middle East quite well, the weekend begins on, so the weekend is Friday and Saturday, whereas everywhere else, your weekend is Saturday and Sunday. And so we had instances, when we started, situations where, for example, on a Sunday morning, I'm in church, my bosses were in the office, sending mails and calling me and all of that. So you've got all of those realities that we deal with, particularly in the context of in the context of work today. And if you look at cognitive, for example, issues around personality, the different personality styles that we all bring to the workplace, how do we harness this, to deliver value for the organization? Because ultimately, that's why we are there, learning styles, our approach to problem solving, and all of these, taken together, sort of highlight the heightened diverse world that we live in. And so clearly you can see that diversity is a reality with us. And I mean, it matters because with diversity, you strengthen innovation, you strengthen creativity, because people come to issues with different perspectives. And once you are able to really get all of that together and harness that, then you are right on your way to, sort of boosting employee engagement, reputation, brand, brand reputation, and things like that. So that's what research has shown. Okay, for organizations that are able to harness diversity, they sort of show better outcomes and results in terms of productivity, employee engagement, retention, and even brand reputation. Just highlighting those. And so if we move quickly to going back to the first poll we took around generational diversity and how you can bridge, that relationship gap, knowing that in today's workplace, there are perhaps 4 generations collaborating side by side. And that's the reality for a lot of us, from our baby boomers who are just about this time, perhaps beginning to exit the workplace, to our Gen X, to the millennials or Gen Ys, and then the Gen Zs. One of the shocking things I found with the poll result was, not having anybody at all from, the Gen Z brackets, responding to the poll. I mean, I saw that in the first poll that we took. And so if you sort of have all of these differences, clearly what that means is that there would be, common points for friction. Okay, and we saw that in the second poll that we took in terms of the frustrations we experience in today's workspace. You saw the responses: technology, the stereotyping, expectations in terms of communication and feedback. And so if you zero that side by side with the slide up here, you would see that, of course, these issues, these are living realities across the globe. So in terms of differences about work ethic, feedback, our approach to career expectations and progression, that came through from the responses we gave. Varied communication preferences, we also saw that. And then as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, this perhaps is maybe the biggest, the assumptions and stereotyping that we all go around with, tied to specific generations. But the good news is, as leaders, what can we do to really navigate ourselves, our teams, our organizations away from these points of frictions, these issues of challenges, to ensure that we are delivering better outcomes? And so there are 3 critical mindset shifts that we must embrace as leaders. First off is looking to collaborate and connect better, as against looking for fault. So who's right, who's wrong? We need to begin to replace, that mindset with, so how can we connect? How can we collaborate better? You must also begin to leverage the strengths of each generation. Like I mentioned, we all come with our diverse and different perspectives. And diversity, as they say, enriches the conversation, enriches, the outcomes. If I go back to my time in KPMG, in Deloitte, if you look at the Big Four, for example, one of the critical elements of how we work is to say we work in multidisciplinary teams. I mean, it is a foundational requirement. And why is that so? Because it has long been established that, the multidisciplinary approach, to problem solving, to engagement planning and project delivery, you end up more often than not delivering better value because people can see challenges from different lenses and they are better able to bring in the positives, the strengths of their own perspective to bear. And more often than not, that ends up with delivering better outcomes and better value across the board for every stakeholder involved. And one of the quick tips and steps we have also seen is what we'll call, reverse mentoring. So you must be able to foster mentoring, in fact, 360, not just both ways. And so older generations, can bless us with their experience, whereas, our younger generations, the millennials, the Gen Zs, and even the alpha generation, we just spoke about AI earlier and, the power of AI in terms of creativity, in terms of innovation. They can bring that to the table and, older generations can learn from that whilst also bringing in the positives of their experience and insights, to the table. And so once we're able to get that balance and mix properly, then we are well on our way to delivering, again, better outcomes, better productivity, more positive culture and approach within the workspace. If we move very quickly to talking about culture and global awareness, this is a critical dimension. And so from a culture standpoint, there are certain critical things you must, that must be at your fingertips when you work in cross-cultural teams, in teams or work groups that cut across jurisdictions, countries, and even regions. First off is, the communication style. Like I mentioned earlier, is it direct? Is it indirect? In the global north, for example, they tend to be, very direct. They tend to go straight to the point, what they say, what they mean. Whereas maybe in many jurisdictions in the global south, the opposite is the case. You tend to sort of, want to be diplomatic, you want to defer and things like that. So as leaders, you must be aware, you must be emotionally sensitive, to these issues. In terms of the power relations as well, is it more egalitarian? Okay, is it flatter as against being hierarchical? Where authority, where respect is more pronounced. So you've got to be aware of that as well. I share an interesting story at this point. So back then in Mondelez, we had I think he was a Polish who was appointed the MD for Mondelez in West Africa. By the way, Mondelez is the Cadbury, that's the Cadbury brand, trading as Cadbury in many parts of West Africa. And so for the first 3 months, the first few months, this guy was here. Every time he came to the office, from the gate, everybody was, saying hello, greeting him, good morning, sir, good morning this, good morning, sir. And he would just walk past. He felt very uncomfortable. And one of those mornings, he rushed into HR. What is going on? Why is everybody, and we had to just, calm him down and take him through, a session to like, oh, it's the norm here. That people are just showing respect, deference to your office and, things like that. It took him time to adjust to that, but that's the reality in this part of the world. Okay, and so you must again be aware of some of these issues and how they impact the workspace, the productivity and outcomes in the workspace. And then we talk about individualism versus collectivism. Okay, again, global north perhaps generally more individualistic as against the global south where we're a bit more, it's the collective really that pushes agenda forward as against the individual. And then if you look at time orientation as well, so those are issues. And again, what are some of the things we must be aware of as leaders, to help us, cope and manage and better get the right positive outcomes that we all look at. So first thing is that you must be aware, okay? This is non-negotiable. You must be aware. Awareness is key. So it's, if you are not aware, then there's no way you can, maybe perhaps even acknowledge your own cultural biases, your own assumptions, which may go, a long way in impacting even your relationships, within your team. And so awareness is key. And you must also lead with an open mind. So in other words, you must be curious. You must be curious. So don't assume, ask questions to get clarity. Okay, I just gave an example of, an MD I used to have who was Polish, and eventually how we resolved that. And because you are open-minded, because you are curious, that automatically makes adaptation even easier for you. And so you are better able to adapt. You become flexible. You understand, okay, the specific nuances coming from, if you like, cultural backgrounds, diversity backgrounds, and things like that. And ultimately, the goal is to become more inclusive. And so what that means is that as a leader, you are creating the right psychological safety for all voices, to thrive, irrespective of, their background or location. And so if we go very quickly to, issues around gender, issues around identity, and how ultimately you can build inclusive leadership. What are some of the common barriers we see? Of course, the unconscious bias. I mentioned that as well. One of the ways to fight this is being, just by being aware, so that you know when you are falling into that zone. Okay, there are microaggressions as well. These are subtle actions or words. You may not be aware of it, but they tend to exclude and diminish others. Okay, so you've got to stay on top of that as well. Unequal opportunities, usually that's what you find. And again, in very different jurisdictions, you have all sorts of affirmative action, helping to deal with this. So what can inclusive leaders do differently? First, you've got to challenge bias, not just externally, but even internally, your own bias, okay? You must model equity. You must use inclusive language, very important. And ultimately, you are creating the right psychological safety space for your team, to thrive. And so as we finalize, this is about my second to the last slide. How do you build inclusive and high performance teams? I mean, first off, it is important to note that inclusion fuels performance, like we demonstrated earlier. And then teams with a high sense of inclusion, tend to collaborate and innovate faster and better. And so that is really important. And then ultimately, with inclusion, you are leveraging diversity, okay, not as a challenge, not as an issue, but as a competitive edge. Diversity in itself, and we have shown this countlessly, that it is a competitive edge. And so taking all of that together, what it means is that for you to build, high performing teams, first off, you must be creating, the right psychological safety nets for your team. Your team must be characterized by trust and respect, shared purpose, as well as equity. So equal opportunities for all. So these are the 4 elements that you must be driving as a leader who wants to be inclusive and create high-performing teams. And so I close with a call to action. First off, it is important, like I mentioned earlier, diversity is a strategic advantage. It is not a challenge. Okay, it is not a challenge. Treat it as a strategic advantage, and you will see that, deliver value in terms of your productivity, in terms of your outcomes as an organization. And as leaders, it is important that we are leading with curiosity. We are open-minded and not stereotyped. Please don't be close-minded. The world is not all about your own experience or culture alone. It's a big, wild world. And so be open, be curious. And if you do all of this, ultimately, you'll be creating a work place where everyone feels important, where everyone matters. And once people feel valued, then they are better able to contribute and ultimately everybody grows. So that would be it really. Like I mentioned, we are happy to take your questions during the panel. You can drop them in the chat box and we move on. So thank you very much. I'm done. Joanne, back to you.
Thank you very much, Chinedu.
Yeah.
Right, we have a quick poll, Chinedu, just in closing on your segment.
Yep.
Thank you for that. I'm going to keep comments and questions for a little bit later on, if you don't mind, Chinedu, when we can get back to them, as you mentioned in the panel. There are some questions, we can keep an eye on that, some comments rather, that we can keep an eye on that. The poll is up. This is an interesting one. Would you be open to being mentored by somebody younger than you? Makes me smile, Chinedu, because you just reminded us on your last slide.
Yeah.
In the middle of the kind of stay curious.
Correct.
Don't have stereotypes. That's great. Right. Thank you. And with that, that poll is closed. It's an interesting result there as well that we can see, but thank you for your participation, everyone, in that one. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Mohamed. We look forward to hearing from you next. Thank you.
Do you hear me well?
We can, thank you.
Brilliant, okay. Just share my screen. Do you see my screen, please? Do you see my screen? Yep.
Yacine, what we are seeing, well, what I'm seeing on my end,
Yes.
if like you might have two screens at the moment.
What about now?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so thank you for having me here with you today. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very happy to be here. So the subject would be generational dynamics at work, what inclusive leaders must know. So yeah, I think that we had also an interesting maybe question, but I think that we had some answers from the initial poll when we seen almost 40%. It was about work expectation and ethics, and it's really interesting to have those inputs in the discussion panel as well. So my agenda, very quickly, I will start by giving you some facts about the current situation about intergenerational issues in workplace. Then we'll try to give a scope of this question or maybe an issue. And I think Chinedu brilliantly concluded with the slide that it's really an opportunity, and it could be strategic insight rather than really an issue. And then I will share with you some approach and practical tools on how to address these questions. And finally, maybe share some possible solutions that are actionable as well. So yeah, this is the initial question. Yeah, so now understanding the current situation, those are some facts about what we know about this issue of multi-generational challenges. Obviously, 59% of employees report witnessing or experience workplace discrimination related to age. 25 under plus 25 under 65 years old workers also suffered from work age-based discrimination. And obviously, women are more stereotyped than men. And we see this in various polls as well and data. And the final one is, of course, when leaders are more inclusive, they could increase the collaboration to up to 29% and higher productivity up to 17%. Obviously, we do have other data to share with you. This is from the International Labour Organization, and United Nations agency. I worked for them for almost 10 years in various projects, and it's really interesting to know those data. For example, in global context today, nearly 30% age discrimination older than 65 years old, workers being discouraged maybe to apply for promotions or maybe to apply for new positions. And the poll is about 102 countries. On the other hand, for young people in 64 countries, 71% of them, they in average higher for prime age adults, means that 70% almost they are paid less than other categories of workers. And the last one is also interesting because of AI. We had this morning interesting, very brilliant as well presentation about AI, and we see that 25 of jobs worldwide are potentially exposed to generative AI, means that those jobs will be replaced, meaning that 4 jobs could be substantial change. And it's interesting to know that 3 female jobs are affected for every 1 male job. And this is also interesting because we still categorize like female job and male job. This is itself kind of discrimination. But yeah, obviously here, International Labour Organization is just, the purpose is really to be more informative and give idea about the current situation. So yeah, we maybe some of us, why it was maybe just to do this transition here. It's interesting to speak about data and facts because maybe some of us were directly exposed to those multi-generational workplace issues, and some of us maybe not. This is where it's interesting to have those data and to show that there really a question mark here whether this subject is top priority in organization or not. But still, yeah, it's the facts are really interesting to show that even if we are not exposed, this is a really a question and issue which needs to be addressed. This is also interesting slide here. I hope that you can see clearly, but yeah, I will just maybe summarize it. It's about the source leadership. This slide is very interesting and showing an overview of working generation about some characteristics, for example, formative experiences, how they perceive this, aspiration, attitude toward technology, attitude toward career, signature product, communication and media, communication preference, how they want to communicate, how they want the communication to be. I think also Chinedu highlighted this in a way. Some of them will be more they will more look after direct communication, others more indirect communication, and the last one is obviously decision making about financial aspect. When I've looked to this article and chart, I have summarized some of the factors from my understanding. I think one of the key factors here is the purpose. What's the purpose of let's say a person which is maybe under 25 years old to be in our organization? What could be the purpose for someone who is maybe more than 25 or 60 years old in the organization? Obviously, their personal purpose would be totally different. The second important factor is decision making. Means that decision making in the workplace, how they take decisions. And I think that it's interesting here. Yeah, I will maybe mention Yves Morieux, which is the managing director of Boston Consulting Group in the Asia region. He said that we cannot have as much rules that we do have situations. So at a certain time, even if we do have all the processes, needed processes, and the clarity that it is required, you will always have some decision that you need to take from your own judgment and evaluation of the situation. And the second one is obviously problem solving. How those different generation look at problems, how they think about the problems, how they analyze problems, and how they solve the problems. Is it in solo, in work group, how they approach the problems. The other one is development, obviously training, development, how they improve their skills, etc., is one aspect which is also important. Communication, obvious one. And the last one also is time and clock. And Chinedu as well highlighted this. It's a very interesting one because some of the what we call is the long-term clock and the short-term clock. And it's interesting to see that some of the decision will be made and will affect your long-term clock, which means that you will start doing something now and maybe you expect a result in maybe 1 year or 2 years. And some generations and yes, specifically the younger generation will be more in short-term clock than long-term clock. And obviously culture is having also its impact on how we look at time. Now, always we are in the scoping of the core question. And here it's interesting because even if the title is about leaders, how can they approach? But in the same time, leaders are, we expect from them to have a contribution as a leader, at the same time to guide, to lead their teams. And the last one is us, which is the organization. And because they are one pillar of the organization and they are also shaping the organization in a positive or a negative way. So this is where it's very important for the leaders to have this self-awareness. So leaders must first recognize their own bias, strengths, and areas for improvement. And one example is, for example, as managers, and I've seen these symptoms or these cases in many organizations when I do consulting for higher education institutions, you will find a manager or program manager assigning tech tasks only to younger staff and delegate decision to older staff, which is itself a stereotype as well. And in some cases, personally, I have encountered that some cases you will find, for example, an IT problem and the youngest generation don't know even how to approach it to understand the problem. And you will find someone with more experience, who is perceived as like more senior people in the negative way. They will just solve the problem. The second one is always about the leader themselves. So the me, unconscious bias. So automatic tools that we have evolved to navigate complex world. It's all the experience, negative or positive, that we have. And one example could be a manager assumes a younger employee would be more creative with social media. Maybe, so yeah, and this is also one of the unconscious bias that we all have. And we really need to think about it. And this is where action learning at the end, I will also emphasize on this, really helps to ask the right questions. This is also a very interesting slide because it's again with unconscious bias. And those occurs mainly when we do have too much information or we provide too much information. And depending on the person that we have or the colleague that we have in front of us, whether they are young or less young or elder, they will react differently according to the amount of information you give them. The other one is what kind of information I need to remember from XYZ person or collaborator. And this is very important as well. You will find that some collaborators, according to their age, they will give more importance to type of information. Maybe some of them will give more importance to personal information, for example, and some of them will just say, no, I don't want you to share with me, and I don't want also to share with you some personal information. The other one is need to act fast, as I said also in the beginning, how we look at the clock, our personal clock, and sometimes we need to act very quickly and we don't consider as a leader the expectations of the collaborators. And obviously, as I mentioned also in the previous slide, is about purpose and meaning, what kind of meaning we are giving to any action, to any decision. And even the communication, what is the clear meaning of every action that we are taking within the organization? And this is very important as well, according to the collaborators and the category in which they are. And this is also a very critical one, because the meaning, it could be very clear for the organization and the leader, but how it is perceived is something else. Again, the affect bias is also very interesting. This is also about the leaders. obviously, this is an interesting one, because sometimes when we communicate, we say maybe we feel that the person in front of us will maybe act totally different from what we expected from them, and we just say, yeah, they are just maybe they are not smart enough, or we will just judge them. And we do have this bias, which is also very dangerous, means that I judge you on your behavior, but I judge myself on my intentions. And this is interesting one as well. And as leaders, we really need also to think about the other counterpart intention, what they are intention, when they do something, when they communicate something, what are the intention behind this? And this is where maybe clear communication is very good advice. Now, reflection question as well. So just to conclude this first part about the leader, what they need to take into consideration, what are the factors that are impacting a multi-generation workplace issue. And this is maybe you can just write the answers on the chat, and maybe it will also help the panel to cover more the subject. So the first one is, those voices do I instinctively value or prioritize? And those might I be intentionally overlooked. And again, here, when you maybe you are in an organization maybe for 5 years, 10 years, and you have your colleague working with you, same age, and maybe you have newcomers, they are younger, and you can really feel it when, for example, you are on a meeting in terms of eye contact, in terms of question, in terms of asking about opinions. You will maybe always look at the people that you know that are same age like you and the same generation. And this is this kind of answers that we are looking for, is really to have this self-awareness about identifying your own bias. The second one, when have I felt discomfort during inclusive conversation? This one is very interesting. I will maybe speak about very shortly about one experience. I was dealing with managing a project of implementing a new program in higher education here in the UK. And obviously, we had to set up a clear structure. And a certain time, when we know that the process of forming a group, we always have these tensions in the beginning. And I had a tension between two people from different background and different generations. And when I tried to solve this, one of the managers said, look, I don't have any problem to live with it. So they prefer to live with the problem, with this tension with another collaborator, who is younger, rather than just having this clear conversation with all parts and deal with it. But the youngest one said, yeah, I don't have any problem. I'm here to speak about it, so why not? And this kind of maybe discomfort that I'm talking about here. And the last one is, what assumptions do I tend to make about others based on their age, gender, or background? And this is also interesting one, when you we all have those stereotypes, and it's just interesting to reflect upon those questions. Now it's about it's the culture. You may say, yeah, it should be about maybe leadership style, how we interact with people, etc., as leaders. But here I'm speaking more about the soft aspect of the culture, how leaders are really shaping those culture. And Chinedu as well covered this in terms of culture and referring to Hofstede insights. And this is really interesting. And my focus would be more on the power distance and how we deal with uncertainty avoidance. Means that how we use our power as leader. Do we use it in the same way with younger people and maybe elder people and from different generation? And this is very interesting as well, because we do have, as leaders, we do have that bias that maybe people with more years of experience would understand more, maybe will be more docile, maybe more understanding than a collaborator which is maybe under 25. And those are really important bias that we need to take care of, and especially about decision maker, how we take decisions. And for example, from my experience, you will find yourself briefing someone from your same generation, you will have the same understanding very quickly. But when you will maybe explain it to a younger, it will take more time. It doesn't mean they don't understand. This is the bias. It's not about understanding. It's about just strengthening the meaning. They are looking more for meaning because they have maybe less experience, but doesn't mean they are less smart, less engaged, or less performant. It's just about the expectation. They expect to have more meaning. Reflective question as well for the we. So in moment of tension, what behaviors do we default to, and what does that reveal about our culture? This is very interesting one, because yeah, we when everything is going as planned, we don't have any issues. Everyone is engaged, everyone is performing. But when the performance is down, or we see the engagement is down, this is where we need really to see and to see the signals, to be really have this particular attention to behaviors that are really are in the surface, and see how people behave. And this is where really, from my perspective, the real indicator about the factual culture which is in place. And this is also interesting question to reflect on. The second one is invisible moment, whose voices are amplified and those are overlooked. And this is also interesting one, from also some of the management and project management meeting. Again, on those higher education institutions, you will have maybe on Teams meetings, and just when we want to speak about something, we just say, yeah, stop recording, and people will speak about something, because they don't want some voices to be amplified, rather than they would just let those opinions and maybe advices or suggestions, just put them aside. And this is also interesting one, and to see if you have, in terms of as a leader with your teams, you are giving more attention, more time to some voices comparing to others, means that really you have to address this and to reflect on what are your bias, internal bias. The last one about the scoping, it's about obviously the organization, which is us. And I think this is the easiest one, because in some cases, for example, here in the UK, again, for some institutions, you will have, for example, universities and colleges, you have the OFS, the Office for Student, and it is mandatory to have this inclusive policy in place, and it is monitored. And it is monitored, you have to tick boxes, provide trainings, and for all staff, for all students. And obviously you need to have all the documents that are clearly describing the policy in place, and visible for anyone that can access. So, but sometimes, obviously, as organizations outside maybe higher education, maybe in production, manufacturing, IT, we don't have systematically those policies in place. Again, because maybe some of the certification, quality certification like ISO or other certifications, organisms, they don't focus really. It's not a key aspect of the certification. This is where obviously, again, I am totally aligned with Chinedu, saying that it's really like a strategic aspect to take into consideration, because you will gain more than you are losing. It will maybe take time. It needs maybe some resources, but it's always really important to have this policy in place. And this is why I really like the Swiss cheese model, when in fact, if you have some holes in each part, it is really difficult to keep the structure in place. And this is where you will have maybe it will be very dangerous, because sometimes, also from my experience, people will be really afraid even to report those maybe issues about multi-generational workplace issues. So they really feel that they were misled, but they don't have the official channel they can use in order to report those issues. So the reflection for us here is, how are we preparing our workplace for next generation? What do our spaces say about who belongs here? And what do our promotions show about what we value? And obviously, again, here, it is interesting to see if we don't have any policy, any guidelines about inclusion from general perspective, this is really the time to think about it and try to implement those policies. And now I will move to the last part, which is exploring approach and tools. And as John said in the presentation, I'm really a defender and really someone who is involved in action learning and really a fan of action learning. This is really what we call a problem-solving framework, and it's really interesting. I've used it for many organizations when we speak about those inclusion problems, not only for multi-generational workplace, but also for obviously gender, ethnic background, cultural background, everything. And this is really interesting where you bring people together and to speak clearly in a safe environment around action learning session when you say, okay, guys, we need to address this and start working on this. And I found out that we sometimes, it's not about the leader. The leader really wants to have more inclusive workplace, but they don't have the tools. One of the aspect is action taking, means that they know about the fact they need to have an inclusion policy, and obviously not only policy, a document which is just stored in one place, in the workplace, in digital workplace on desktop. It's really something that is alive on daily basis. So they know that they need to implement it, but they don't know how to do it. What are the steps? For example, to deal with an issue, when someone is reporting an issue about inclusion, how I need to deal with it. And this is where those sessions with action learning, and as leaders, you can really spot out what is the priority for me in order to move to and to take the maximum out of this inclusion policy. The second one is decision making, means that we do have the knowledge, we do have the policy, we do have everything available. We have as a leader, there is nothing which has been reported, but we observe that there are some behaviors that are against inclusion, but we just are busy with performance, with operations, etc. And we didn't give the good level of priority for that subject. And this is where it's about decision making as well. And the third one is problem finding. We have the knowledge and know what to do, but we don't understand why the problem exists. Means that we have a policy in place. We make sure we provide trainings. In every meeting, we emphasize on inclusion, but still we have some aspects related, or some people are still reporting some issues about inclusion. And this is where we need also to look again at the whole system, how it is designed. And the final one is idea finding. A new problem has emerged, and obviously with AI, you will have some new problems emerging as well. And it was funny to see how videos can be generated in using only your face and your photo. And this is where obviously the company and organization as a whole and the leader should initiate those discussions about how to improve those policies and how we can improve the culture about inclusion. So to summarize this slide, is really the soft tool that can help the leader on daily basis to have this kind of thinking framework, say, okay, how can I improve the inclusion in my organization? Is it I don't know how to do it, or I didn't take the decision to do it, or I am implementing it, but I still observe some gaps, etc. This is really simple framework that help on daily basis to ask the right question and to obviously to trigger the right actions. And yeah, I think that this is a very powerful tool that I really also used in some project, which really helped the leaders and the organization to prioritize. And what is interesting about action learning, obviously, you bring all the stakeholders together. And also, again, it's a way of showing that this subject of inclusion is important. And also you are taking part of that project with the team in order to improve it on daily basis. The other one is more about, let's say, the hardware is obviously the steps that HR, if you don't have any inclusion policy, these are some simple steps, how to obviously to implement this policy. The first one is obviously to draft a comprehensive anti-discrimination policy, provide regular training with clear goals, establishing safe reporting mechanism. This is very important one because, for example, some organizations, you will find that if someone is reporting an issue about discrimination about age, for example, you will find, for example, it's only the HR that will receive this request of investigation, for example. It's not reported to the direct line manager or whatever. It's only the HR who will deal with this. Act swiftly and transparently. Obviously, this is also very important. Foster open communication, measure and monitor progress. This is also very important, and celebrate diversity and inclusion. One example is also, for example, when I was working in some project, you will find people from different ethnic background. You will have like food festival. And obviously about the age, we cannot have age festival, but yeah, we can really have something around celebrating those the achievement maybe of different people from different generations. And about this slide, very important as well, recognize, respect, and reconcile. Means that, again, going back to the bias, if you have something reported about those aspects as a leader, you really need to take it into consideration. It should never be a priority 5 or 10. It is really something that you need to recognize, to report, or to deal with directly. Respect, obviously, because sometimes when we are human being, we are, as a leader, maybe really focused on stressful days, weeks when we need to perform. And sometimes you have just this complaint about an issue about inclusion, about maybe multi-generation, maybe young collaborator will say, will come to you and complain about XYZ behavior of older collaborators. And you really need to respect that and to take it as a complaint. And obviously, if you do have inclusive policy in place, you will go through the policy. But if you don't have one, you really need to take into consideration. And this is where coaching as well will help in asking the right question, and obviously trying to be empathetic as well. And reconcile is very important as well. Don't be afraid of bringing people together in order really to give new basis for that relationship. Because as we said, again, don't just don't judge people by their behavior, but also from their intention. I will conclude with this. So develop possible solutions. I just try to give you some practical, let's say, solutions, how you can really navigate this. Obviously, this is, it can be perceived as general, but in terms of inclusion, specifically for multi-generational workplace, it is also valid for other aspect of inclusion. And the first one, as we said in the beginning, is purpose and meaning, core motivation, doing work. So you really need to see what are the motivations of those multiple generation collaborators. Leadership practice, link roles to organization mission, daily examples, start meeting with purpose, share impact stories. And this is where it's, again, we go back to the voices that you want really to promote. It is also very important to promote voices from different generation of your collaborators. And pitfalls to avoid focusing only on tasks without showing purpose. Recognizing and reward, feeling valued. This is, I think, valid for every generation. Offer fair and timely appreciations. And this is also interesting one, because according to what generation you are, you will maybe look at the clock again, saying that maybe the youngest generation will look at more shorter, timely recognition rather than comparing to an older collaborator. Again, doesn't mean that this is right, this is wrong. You just, as a leader, need to adapt and take into consideration this aspect. Daily examples, public praise, transparent appraisals, peer recognitions, This is also very interesting when you will have those peer recognitions. I think also Chinedu spoke about the 360 degrees tool, which is very interesting when you will get some feedback from different perspective. And obviously, it's interesting to have this feedback from, if you are younger, to have this feedback from elder person and vice versa. Pitfalls, inconsistency, recognition of favoritism. This is, we said, this is a bias that could also affect the feedback. Growth and learning, development and mastery, core motivation, both of them. Promote continuous learning. This is very important as well. Monitoring cross-team project learning time. So this is also interesting when you can put people in common in project from different generations. This is also will really reduce the bias from both sides. Pitfalls to avoid: ignoring development's needs or favoriting few, saying, yeah, this is this guy or this lady is the same generation as me. We don't need to do this training. We know we've been practicing this for long years, so we don't need to do it. It's very important to avoid those bias and really manage expectations about the growth and learning. Specifically now we do have the AI, which is everyone is looking to AI. This is also interesting when we look at some conferences, AI, you will get the ads on YouTube saying that if you are over 40, you need to do this training. So yeah, this is also interesting to see what I'm curious to see if the youngest generation are having also getting these ads. But yeah, this is the perception really that it is the perception or the bias is that maybe people over 40 need more time. They need to be in a room for 40 days in order to master it. And it's not the case for younger people. Those are bias that you need to take into consideration. Communication and connection. Again, clarity and inclusion. Very important. Keep communication open and 2 ways. Weekly checks in feedback loops, active listening. This is also an interesting example. I will give you good and bad example. The bad example is that, for example, I've seen managers taking new positions and they will just sit in their office for 1 week without speaking about their new collaborators. And this is really something weird, because when I step in and say, okay, how can you maybe improve your onboarding here? And when I was feeding forward, I say that, do you think that maybe taking time, maybe 30 minutes from your day and making one-to-one, not about the performance, not about the project, but more about expectation. How do you want to work with your collaborators, and and listen from your collaborators how they want to work with you, and from different perspective. I'm not asking you to do it on team, but just one-to-one in order to really make it clear how you want to work with them. And this is also one of the aspects of clear communication, depending on how you do those checks and active listening. Because when we do communicate, when we are focused on operations, it's almost impossible really to capture what are the expectations in terms of process of work, because people are focusing on the deliverable and not the process. Pitfalls to avoid: withholding information as well, maybe sharing information with some people that are maybe same generation like you, and maybe not doing it with younger collaborators. The last one is trust, safety, well-being, respect, balance. Obviously, we all know that way maybe, or depends on your personal circumstances. Obviously, when we look at trust, safety, and well-being, generations are having different expectations. And as a leader, you really need to take into consideration. And one of the daily examples: encourage ideas, offer hybrid work, respect boundaries. And again, it starts with clear communication about expectations. And pitfalls to avoid is micromanaging, or neglecting well-being, saying that those people are young, they have more energy, more punch, so I will give them more work to do. I will ask them to stay in the office for longer hours, etc. These are some of the pitfalls that you need to avoid. My last slide, obviously, the inclusion policy, if you do have one, it's also very important, because it will give you a framework, kind of legitimacy, because it will be also driven by the organization. But I assume that in the audience, we do have some entrepreneurs that are maybe less sized companies, and maybe you cannot afford to have this inclusion policy, but it's really need to communicate it regularly, at least to have a document which is even if it's small one, that really emphasize on the fact that as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you are really taking into consideration this inclusion aspect. So my last slide, 2 slides, in fact, inclusivity within multi-generational workforce is strongly shaped by culture. This is only my opinion, obviously, and making it essential to consider non-Western epistemological perspectives. I've learned this since I came to the UK, working with various people from various countries, and this is very important. And when you take a young British student or collaborator, and maybe Asian, South Asian, Nigerian, African, North African, European, maybe French, Dutch, it's totally different. And the younger are more shaped at this age by their own culture. It's not about the generation, but it's more about the culture. And this is why I propose to you here as well to conclude my presentation with some interesting insight. The first one is Quantum Leader from Dana Zohar. She is from the Middle East, but she wrote a book, brilliant book. She sat with Haier, which is this Chinese appliance company, with their leader, and it is very interesting to take into consideration the aspect about Quantum Leader. Malik Benabi, Algerian, North African, also author, Subculture Product. This is where, for example, the subculture product means that you are making billboards and backgrounds everywhere in the office saying that we do have this culture positive, but behavior is at the opposite. This is what he calls the subculture product. The other one is Google, which is also communication codes that you really need to understand the various communication codes from different generations and from culture. Last one, because the global conference is also about resilience. I like really very much this book, is Nassim Nicolas Taleb, The Resilience Survives, Anti-Fragility Transforms. Though let's be anti-fragile instead of resilient. Thank you very much.
Lovely, Mohamed. Thank you very much. Round of applause there to Mohamed and Chinedu, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Lovely. Thank you. So, Mohamed, you remind us to think outside of the box. Thank you for that. I think for this purpose, I'm now going to refer to our chat box and invite some of our panel members to join us on screen for, I think, to look at some of the questions we've got. There are some in the chat. Let me introduce our panel members to you. So, in addition to Mohamed and Chinedu, I'd like to next introduce Dr. George Woods. Please join me in welcoming Dr. George Woods, who is the Chief Strategy and Business Officer at St. John Ambulance UK. His career spans humanitarian aid, digital transformation, and organizational leadership across continents. Now, here's something I did not know about you, George. George was knighted in 2022 for his service. George brings more than 30 years of experience in building resilient, inclusive organizations. I will call you Sir from now on, George. Tuan van der Heuvel, our Dean at Business School Netherlands, is a trusted figure in our team with more than 25 years of experience in leadership and consultancy, starting his journey with BSN back in 2002, ladies and gentlemen. Tuan brings a practical, hands-on approach that really helps students turn theory into action. Thank you for joining us, Tuan. And then also on our panel today is Juanita Bauer. You've met her. Most of you, I think, would know her as well. Director at Business School Netherlands International. Juanita brings, in addition to also 25 years of service and experience with BSN, she brings the world to our doorstep by working across continents to help professionals apply learning in real organizations. She's based in Cape Town. Juanita also helps us bridge the global reach and practical impact of our programs. Welcome, everyone, to this conversation. Right, I'm going to start with a question from the audience, and that question reads from Lusanda. Thank you for putting the question to us. what strategies can leaders use to ensure that outspoken but respectful employees are valued rather than labeled as difficult? You're welcome to raise your hand if you'd like to take the question. The question reads, what strategies can leaders use to ensure that outspoken but respectful employees are valued rather than labeled as difficult? Who would like to take that?
John, shall I have a go? And then if colleagues want to come in, it's about creating a workspace that is inclusive, but truly inclusive. So that if we talk about culture that underpins everything we do, I mean, there's the oft quoted phrase by Drucker that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if your culture is unhealthy, you could have the greatest strategy in the world. It's just not going to land. But part of a good culture practice is creating an inclusive environment and creating an environment where there's creative tension. And part of creative tension is welcoming opinions that are different from yours. So I think it starts with leadership, would be my first sort of input.
Lovely. Thank you for that, George. John, that'll lead me to the next question, which is how can leaders move beyond simply being aware of bias to building inclusive habits that make a measurable difference in their teams? How would you comment on that, John?
Well, at least I think you should make inclusion visible in your daily life. So in your daily routines, who gets invited to meetings, who gets credited, who gets supported, and of course, track the results that come out of that. Tracking the results can be made simple. It means that you hold people accountable and you recognize when inclusion is being practiced. And for that reason, it becomes a live practice and not just like a policy statement that you're making.
Great food for thought there, Tuan. Thank you for that.
If I may just add, sorry, Juan, and so beyond practice is also rewarding, inclusion, so embedding that as part of your people processes, and it comes with tangible rewards. And I dare say even sanctions, it gets called out when it's not being lived. I mean, in my experience, those are practical steps to really deepen, inclusion beyond just mouthing it and documenting as policies.
Fully agree.
Right. Thank you, Chinedu. Thank you, Tuan. I've got a question here that reads, how can leaders become more aware of the subtle differences in values, perhaps motivation and communication that come with age diversity? Juanita, I'm going to ask you to take this one, please.
Yeah, Jean, that's quite an interesting question because there are lots of challenges in multi-generational teams. It's not about big conflicts. It's usually about small understandings and how people see work, purpose, and recognition. For me, the awareness starts with a curiosity, not an assumption. So it's very easy to label young people don't like structure or older people don't like change. We need to look rather at stability, growth, recognition, and impact. I think that's far more important. That would be my answer to that question.
Really difficult question, that is, Sean. So depending on where you live and who you work with, there are differences. Let's say in the Netherlands where I'm from, and probably in Europe in total, we have more jobs than people. Of course, the baby boomers are out. Gen X is still fully in, but then we get to know our people from generation Y, Z, Alpha, and so forth. And they have a different understanding of working. And that's hard to cope with because work ethics, that kind of stuff, the engagement that people are giving you, the expectations when people are not forced to stay in the job, not willing to make a career, makes it difficult to manage those people. So that's a question on which the answer I don't have, but I can at least explain a bit what's happening.
Well, thanks for that one. And often the answers are not that clear cut and direct, because context, I think, applies in so many of our realities. I'm going to ask I'm taking a question, if you don't mind, as panelists, from Damilola. And her question is, apologies, how can racism and communication barriers be effectively managed in a multinational organization? Quite a tricky one, a difficult one. I'll repeat the question. How can racism and communication barriers be effectively managed in a multinational organization? George, it looks like you might want to take this one.
And I'm sure there'd be other thoughts on this as well, but it starts with the values of the organization. So what kind of values you espouse, what kind of behavior is acceptable and not acceptable. I think it's an intentional equity, diversity, and inclusion policy, and something that is really clearly implemented. And I also think it's about real active development of leaders to call out behavior when it's inappropriate, to demonstrate good values, good leadership qualities, etc. So that would be my input to that.
You. Anyone else on the panel? Mohamed, I see your hand is up.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah. I think that the first one, again, is really to look at the organization. If I was an employee and I need to check really the reputation of the company and the culture that is really diffused outside the environment from previous collaborators. This is the first thing. And the second thing, I think that we should look at the onboarding process. And this is where, as Toyin, as I said, George said it also, is to look at, if we are saying we do have inclusion policy, but do we make it alive on daily basis? So do we are providing training regularly? And those are the questions that maybe we need to ask. But in some cases, even if we do have the policy, we do have the training, we always have some behaviors that are maybe racist or whatever. And this is where we look at the history, how it was looked, what are the actions that were taken in order to mitigate this. And again, if you find some organizations that are not taking actions because some of the people that were racist or labeled racist, they have more power than other people. This is where also you will just say it's not a problem, blah, blah, blah. And this is where we really need to have this very clear communication. And maybe I will be kind of violent here in terms of verbally, is just to ask the question if we still want to work there. And it will come back to you as a collaborator, and it will be your decision, and not being on the victim position. And you will just say, yeah, it's not the culture for me, and bye-bye, I need to leave this company. And this is maybe some stages that we can really take into consideration to deal with those issues.
Thank you, Mohamed.
I think that, again, just sharing perspective as well. I think beyond, the policies and the systems and the processes and tools is actually action. And I give you a quick example, drawing from my experience. So one of the indicators would be how diverse the leadership team is, for example. We see that a lot. And, from the point of not just gender, but also race, ethnicity. And if you look at certain jurisdictions across the world, you see that there are even regulatory initiatives in place to guarantee that in terms of affirmative action, just so people feel comfortable and they're better able to, deal with or go with the confidence that, oh, yes, my concerns, my issues will be better listened to and addressed. People feel more comfortable when they see, when there are actions signaling that, hey, diversity is an important element, for us as an organization. Just thought to add that.
Lovely. Thank you, Chinedu. I want to touch on what I would term a concept, and I'm smiling as I'm pondering this as well, but flexibility is a big word in today's leadership language. And so how do we stay flexible without creating perceptions of unfairness between generations, especially around things like work-life balance or hybrid work. Juanita, how would you comment on that?
I would say probably the key focus, Jean, is that there should be fairness through consistency and clarity that needs to be communicated. It's not your younger generation might prefer hybrid work. Your older generation might prefer to be in the office. And it's not always the sameness. So the flexibility can only be possible if there's a clarity on why certain people are given those benefits or deemed benefits. That has to be very clear. And I think if that communication is clear, it should not be problematic.
Okay. Lovely. Any other reflections? George? Sir George, thank you.
Absolutely. I think Juanita's right on the money there. But there's also focus on outcomes, not presence. And so if we look in a multi-generational context, I think outcomes are more important these days, and particularly in hybrid working. So the old-fashioned method of monitoring time in the office, those days have gone. It's outcomes-based.
And it feels like, George, just a reflection comment on that as well. It always feels like COVID started all of this. Because pre-COVID, so much of this didn't exist, and in such a short space of time, and I'm going to say, thanks to COVID, so much has changed, really.
Indeed. I think that's right.
Yeah. Mohamed, your reflections, please.
Yes, thank you, John. I just will build upon Juanita and George's comment. I think that we need to have like a clarity, a box, and the flexibility should be inside that clear box. And then obviously managing expectations. And what I mean by expectations here is deliverable, which means that the performance, but also the process, which means if I can give an example, I need you to deliver that report, but I need you also to speak with XYZ and maybe to gather information or to double check. This is the process. Because if you just say, okay, I need you to deliver, they just maybe do whatever they want and they will work on evening when people are sleeping and they miss a bit of information. They cannot move with the process. So this is where maybe it's very important in terms of flexibility, manage expectation about the deliverable, but the process of work as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Mohamed.
Welcome.
I'm just keeping an eye on the chat here as well for other questions. I think as we bring this segment to a close, one element that I would like to invite perhaps a couple of reflections on, or considerations, or maybe some tips, if I can call it that, is what would you consider to be practical ways in which leaders can deepen diversity within their teams? How would you comment on that?
Well, like the answer on our first question, so it basically is action taking. So do not just make policies, do not just make statements, do not only put something on a piece of paper and put it inside a drawer or something, but give the example, try to get those mixed groups into your organization. So if you have a project going on, don't fall back on the same people that you were using for like 10 years before, but try to make those groups diverse each time, exchange them, and really make this a daily routine in which you work. I think that's part of the answer, at least.
Thank you for that one. Any other reflections?
Yes, I think for me, I mean, the first step is really would be awareness. Just be aware, just be aware of the facts of diversity, within your team, and as much as possible, be intentional about, leveraging diversity. And for me, being intentional also means, staying true to type, being authentic. You've got to be authentic about it. You've got to be transparent about it. You've got to be deliberate about it. How you go about leveraging this. Of course, obviously bearing in mind that diversity itself is, like we mentioned earlier, is a competitive edge, not a challenge. And so that needs to be sold across the team. Absolutely. So those would be my points here.
Indeed, and may I add one more, if that's okay, just around diversity and recruitment. So there's something about being conscious about how you recruit, and doing a bit of research in advance of this, the blind assessment protocols. So what that means is almost 6 out of 10 employees would feel more confident. They would be fairly considered for a new job if they knew an employer used anonymized recruitment. And we whether we like it or not, we have bias, and so you need to be conscious of that bias. And part of the way you get around the consciousness of bias, whilst you work on it, of course, is anonymized recruitment. So look at skills-based recruitment, but anonymized. Yeah.
In my reference to white labeling CVs or white labeling candidate profiles, so that you avoid that kind of those insights into who you're looking at. I get that. Very good point. Thank you, Mohamed.
Yeah, I think one of the key practical aspects also is to celebrate good behaviors. In some organizations, we do have systems that we really have a box to fill in inclusion star of the month. And we just invite people to comment on inclusive behaviors, and we just celebrate and communicate it to all the collaborators saying, this is the behavior and this is the person who really demonstrated those behaviors.
Thank you, Mohamed. Any closing comments? Anything else you'd like to add? Chinedu, it looks like you might be pondering something.
I think, Jean,
just feeding off Mohamed's points. I mean, the need, you really can't, emphasize that enough. The need to recognize and reward. It's extremely, extremely important in this journey towards deepening diversity and inclusion.
Super. Thank you. Sorry, Juanita, you wanted to add?
Yes, I just wanted to say the responsibility starts and stops with us also. So we need to make sure that we foster an environment of inclusion. We foster an environment where we acknowledge when we are being biased and try to correct the behavior. I think it starts with us. We set the scene.
Super. Thank you. All right, everyone. I think that brings this discussion to a close. Just in the interest of time, I would like to thank this esteemed panel for, again, another very interesting topic, very relevant to all of us. So can we please give this panel also a lovely hand of applause? Thank you very much.